Kate Raworth, thank you so much for joining us for a conversation here at the Reporting 3.0 conference. And actually, we're doing it at the TELUS Institute here in Boston, where you're giving a talk. And I wanted to start things out just with getting people familiar with the idea of the donut. So first off, what is it and how did you come to conceptualize the idea of a donut of all things?
I know, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
So I sat down and tried to draw a picture of what progress would look like in the 21st century. And it came out looking like a donut, the kind with a hole in the middle. So in that hole in the middle is a space of shortfall where people are falling short on life's essentials, be it food and water, housing, decent healthcare, education, electricity, income, the essentials that are agreed by the world in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals to be the minimum standards required for people to lead a life of dignity and opportunity and community. So we want to get everybody out of that hole in the middle of what I've called a social foundation, the inner crust of the donut, into the donut itself. Okay. But we have to make sure that at the same time as doing that, we don't overshoot the donut's outer crust and push our planetary system out of the extraordinary stability that it's been in for the last 11,000 years that's given us this very stable and benevolent home. So we mustn't be causing climate change or excessive fertilizer use, which runs into lakes and oceans and eutrophies the water, too much land conversion, a hole in the ozone layer, biodiversity loss, these kinds of threats to the stability of the planet. So the donut really says we need to make sure that we meet the needs of all within the needs of the planet. And how do we do that in the 21st century?
Okay, so live within the donut.
Yes.
Right.
Everybody over the social foundation, but staying within the environmental ceiling. So that space between, we can call it a safe and just space for humanity to thrive.
Okay, and that was building off of work that had been done by Johan Rockström.
Yeah, so I saw this diagram of 9 planetary boundaries that Johan Rockström and others had come up with in 2009. And I had this jolt of adrenaline through me when I saw that diagram. It was as if Earth system scientists were saying, if economists won't recognize that the economy is a subset of the Earth system, we're going to draw it for you. In fact, we've done it in our metrics of parts per million of carbon dioxide, or tons of nitrogen, or hectares of land converted. And I was so excited when I saw this because it felt like a rebalancing between the power of economic framing and the Earth system on which we depend. And I'm sitting in a social justice organisation working for Oxfam.
Right.
And so I'm thinking, what's the social justice story that we can add to complement this? And I realised that just as there are outer limits of pressure that we can put on the planetary system, so too there are inner limits at the level of the individual being with our human rights, inner limits of resource use. So there's something about our relationship with drawing on Earth's resources, that we use enough or engage enough of them that we can meet our rights, but not put so much pressure that we actually kick the planet out of kilter.
Okay, and that actually, this relationship between the systems on the one hand and the individuals within that system really brings it to the area of interest in particular for Reporting 3.0, which is we look at companies, individual companies, as compared to just individual people, and how do we in a 21st century economy strike that balance at the company level compared to the systems level? And I think, we're right here in Alan White's office at the TELUS Institute, and Alan, of course, was a co-founder of the Global Reporting Initiative, and importantly, what I call the godfather of the notion of sustainability context, which is the principle in the GRI about respecting these systems constraints while at the individual company level. So how do you reconcile that sort of individual versus collective or individual versus systems tension?
So I think the individual human rights form the social foundation of the donut.
Right.
And indeed the goal of the 21st century is to meet the needs of all within the means of the planet. So then there's the question, what kind of companies are fit and able to make that happen, to be part of achieving that goal, what kind of corporate design, from the mission to the financing to the governance structuring, actually enables companies that in the very process of doing their core business are helping to bring humanity into the donut space, getting everybody out of that space of deprivation, coming back within planetary boundaries, rather than, I'd say, many 20th century companies made profit and succeeded at the cost of pushing people out of that space and pushing us over planetary boundaries. So it's a very different kind of central idea of what's our core business model that's actually helping bring humanity into the donut.
Okay, so and this is actually a great interconnection with the Reporting 3.0 New Business Models Blueprint, that really it's is your business model consistent with, is it in harmony with the donut, so to speak? Yes.
Is your brand, your corporate brand, a donut brand? Are you helping to bring humanity into space rather than continuing to push us out of it?
Okay. Now, one of the things that's very popular nowadays is the Sustainable Development Goals. So companies looking at the SDGs as a kind of way of approximating the donut, if you will. You had mentioned that in your book that when the SDGs were being created, they actually used your image. It was on the table, so to speak. So, and you also talk about the power of imagery. So could you talk a little bit about, how the donut is actually helping us to reconceptualize, to rethink, to change our mindsets about how economics work?
So I first drew this donut diagram back in 2012. And it was published as a discussion paper by Oxfam as an idea, a useful idea that might help us rethink about the relationship between social justice and environmental integrity. I was completely amazed by the pickup that it had, by the traction it gained so suddenly. It was in the run-up to the Rio Plus 20 conference on sustainable development, so these issues were very much in the air, but the uptake and the excitement with which people received this diagram completely surprised me. And it really fascinated me. Why are people so taken with and excited by having a new picture? Because it's just a picture with some words on it that we already knew. And this made me realise two things. One, I think it was powerful because it built on this emerging Earth system science of planetary boundaries that Johan Rockström and others had created, but it put humanity into that story. Two, many people said to me, oh, at last, there's one diagram I can point to that, if I work for an environmental organisation, I can use this diagram to show that I care about people too. Or the other way around, I work for a social justice organisation, at last there's a diagram that shows that I also care about the health of the planet, that these two things are interdependent, and we can start looking for the connections. But the third thing is I just came to realise the power of pictures, the power of imagery to frame our paradigms. Because in our education, mine was an economics education, we're taught that the text and equations are the real source of learning, and the diagrams are perhaps seen as illustrations off to the side. What I realised actually, and reading deeper into it, is that images go deep into our brains and they sit in the visual cortex at the back of our brain. They linger long after the words and the equations have faded. And if they're the wrong image, it's like intellectual graffiti on your mind. So you should pay great attention to the images that are presented to you in education, and to the images that we teach and that we share and that we use, because they can frame what we can and can't see, what we think does and doesn't count, what we centre and what we push to the margins. So I realised through the power of the donut that I wanted to go back to my own economics education and interrogate all those images that have been put into my head. And if we want to tell a new economic story for the 21st century, which I think we very much do, I believe we can only tell a story if we accompany it with new pictures, because you can't tell a new story with old pictures.
And so the way I'm hearing this is that the image itself, or the series of images that you're using, actually play a role. They're a mechanism in that kind of mindset transformation that you're talking about. Now, how can you extrapolate that out to the scale of paradigm change, mindset shifting that needs to happen? I mean, if this happens within a few individuals, we're not going to transform quickly enough. So how does that imagery work and the conceptual foundation that it's built on work to really scale up the change at the pace we need?
So in terms of the pace we need, I think we need to have a twofold strategy.
Okay.
On the one hand, with the current generation of policymakers, of business leaders, I think it makes sense to work with the concepts that people are already working with. So I understand why people express value in monetary terms. They want to put a price on many environmental or social values. I understand why people do that, because they're trying to speak the current language of power to those who are in power. But I think there's a second track, which is, I think of the following generation, the young people today who want to be part of changing the world, who want to create a better future. And so go off to university or even study in high school some economics, because they believe as it's the mother tongue of public policy, it will equip them. And it makes me so frustrated, and I'll admit it, angry, that what they're being taught are the diagrams from the 20th century, which are deeply out of date. So if we're going to create a new paradigm and mindset worthy of the next generation, then we need to redraw those pictures. So it's a dance of playing with the tools we already have to work with existing policymakers to quickly turn that curve. And there is some way we can go using the current frame, the current language, talk about externalities, and we need to take account of externalities. I'd say in the new economics that we need, we wouldn't be talking about externalities, because nothing is external.
Right.
These are just effects, and everything is interconnected. So I think we need those two languages at the same time, and I'm really focusing on the new future language.
Okay, and one of the things that we in the Thrivability Foundation, another organization I work with, we looked at the donut very carefully. We were very inspired by it, and recognized that the donut is drawn on a two-dimensional sheet of paper, and yet really what you're wanting to do is take that inside area within and live within there and build up, so it almost becomes a three-dimensionality. And that's sort of the kind of interaction that your image invites. So can you talk a little bit more about the actual living within the donut and sort of filling it out and making it? One of the things you talk about is moving into regeneration and thriving. What promise do you see in terms of that direction?
So I think in order to give ourselves even half a chance of moving into this donut and meeting the needs of all within the needs of the planet, I think two design principles need to come to the fore in 21st century economies: to be distributive by design and regenerative by design. So to be distributive by design would be an economy that's distributed by design is one in which value created is shared far more equitably with all of those who helped to create it. An employee-owned company would be an example, where profit generated by the company is shared more equitably amongst employees, rather than the majority of it siphoned off to shareholders, distant and fickle, who may never actually step over the threshold of the company. Another example would be complementary currencies, which can be designed to circulate value within a particular community where that circulation would be very low. Or the Creative Commons, putting ideas not as copyrights and patents, but putting them in the Creative Commons so they can be shared and improved again and again. All of these are everyday examples of distributive design. But we also need regenerative design, because 20th century industry has been structured by linear degenerative design, where we take Earth's materials, we make them into stuff we want, use it for a while, and then throw it away. And that linear take, make, use, lose cuts against the living processes of life, and they are degenerating the sources of our living world. So we need to bend those lines around and create a regenerative economy. Some call it cradle to cradle, some call it the circular economy, but the idea is that we regenerate Earth's resources and we restore, repair, and reuse the materials that we've made, so that we restore ourselves as participants in the living systems of the Earth. So there's distributive design, regenerative design. I think that companies could be designed along those principles, communities can be, cities can be designed along those principles. Education can be designed to take those into account. So there's many different scales and ways we can think about what would it look like, and what would it look like to have a financial system that actually was in service to distributive and regenerative design.
Which is really what we've committed to do in terms of a green and inclusive economy. We the world agreed to that in 2012, and now we really have to map out how to get from here to there. So that brings me to one other sort of where this is expressed, and you're looking primarily at the macroeconomic level and at the economy level, so primarily policy making. How do you see, what changes in policy are you advocating for, and in particular that intersect with the market and at the corporate level? What kinds of tools do we have in the policy sphere that can trigger that kind of change?
Okay, I'll give 3 examples, and I think they're all familiar because they are policies that already there is demand for. One, shifting very rapidly away from fossil fuels to renewable energies, because that's an obvious source of regenerative energy for the new economy. So government's putting in place the incentives, the regulations, the taxes that speed that shift. 2, shifting taxes from taxing the employment of people, a payroll tax, to taxing the use of resources. Because we want productivity in the economy, and we've been chasing labour productivity for centuries, how to employ fewer and fewer people, rather get more resources, more return from one person. In fact, we should be seeking return from the use of resources as part of this regenerative design. So shifting taxes from labour to resource use. But third, I would say, really important for governments to enable the creation of new legal forms of business, whether it's community interest companies as exist in the UK, or B Corp, or different designs of business that actually require them to put living purpose at their heart, enable different kinds of financing, enable different kinds of structures and relationships with your owners, so that companies can become tools and vehicles for creating regenerative and distributive design, rather than being driven by 20th century shareholder mentality, which always is asking how much value can we extract from this. And I love the question that Janine Benyos poses, which is how many benefits can we layer into this so we can give some away? I think of that as a 21st century design question. And we need to create 21st century companies that are actually structured and created in order to deliver on that possibility.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that notion of, what do we do with the surplus, so to speak, which right now the profit, largely goes to shareholders, but the system that we have right now is not going to give that up readily. So how do you speak in ways that boards and investors will embrace and not be threatened? So is there a way to articulate donut economics in a way that is palatable and even exciting for boards, C-suites, investors, etc.?
So palatable and exciting, that is two interesting words. So palatable, if you want to make it palatable today, sure, there are ways of telling companies that respecting human rights and looking after the environment will deliver to their bottom line. But actually, I'm more interested in being exciting, which means not speaking to their immediate short-term financial interests, but actually presenting a transformative agenda, presenting a big picture of the future that we need to create, and then asking them, almost as individuals, who are you within this company, and what role is it playing, and what kind of transformation does your company need to undertake to step into this space? So I think it's too easy to ask the comfortable questions of, I don't want to sell this to any company, but I promise you if you use this donut model, it'll enhance your profits next season. I'd rather say, this is the space where we need to get to this century. What kind of role can your company play in it? And what I found, in fact, in presenting the donut to companies, I found 5 broad responses. And what I call the corporate to-do list. At the bottom of the list is do nothing. I see these problems, it's nothing to do with me, what I'm doing is almost legal, I'm going to carry on until somebody needs to tell me I change. First level up would be do what pays. I'll cut my carbon emissions if it delivers me cost savings. I'll take on a green branding if it brings me niche consumers. And that, I think, would be making it very palatable in the short term. But it's not transformative. Next level up, I'll do my fair share. What's our national emissions target? Well, we'll make the same cuts in our company. Fair shareism is a step up, but the danger is we have no aspiration. I'll just do my fair share. It can quickly get turned around to what's my fair share of pollution, actually. And there we jostle for space. So I think we want to go up to the 4th level, which is I'll do mission zero, or I'll do no harm. How can we actually generate as much energy as we use? How can we sequester as much carbon as we emit? So to go to mission zero, and that's at the beginning of a transformative ambition, because you're starting to think about the cycles, the living cycles of the world, but whether it's carbon or oxygen or nitrogen, and what's my role in enabling those cycles. But why do no harm, as Bill McDonald would say, when you can do good? So we need to burst through that ceiling of imagination and go from doing no harm to actually being generous. As Janine Benyus would say, can you create a company that's generative, that is actually producing net positive value? So from doing nothing all the way up to actually being generative, how do we layer so many benefits into the way our company is run and what we produce, that we can give some away, call it social, environmental capital, that we can give that away as well as deliver a fair return to our investors. In that journey, I think the real challenge isn't what are my suppliers down the line doing, or what materials are my products made from, but how is my company structured? What's our mission? How are we financed? How are we owned? Because those questions, the DNA of the company, I think, are what enable it to make this transformative leap.
It's the way that you describe that is very much in alignment with what we're talking about at Reporting 3.0, where bursting through that line, so the fair share responsibility and meeting just the sustainability thresholds, we place that in the middle, where most people are seeing the SDGs as sort of that's the be-all end-all. We're saying that actually beyond that is where things start to get really exciting.
Yes.
And we talk about not just net positive, but gross positive returns, where really all of the impacts that you're creating are positive impacts, so that there is this kind of abundance and not sort of netting out the negative impacts.
Nice, I like that. And then the real question is, how can you create reporting KPIs and indicators that actually recognize and reward that? So that, say, if I have a company where we have net zero carbon emissions, I shouldn't get 100% tick for that, because actually that's capping the possibility that I could be generative. So I think this is the next leap in terms of reporting initiatives, is creating that space at the top for those who become generative, net positive or gross positive, as you say.
Well, that's exactly what we're doing in Reporting 3.0, is sort of mapping out that space, and it's really firmly in the donut. We've in fact taken some of the graphics. Some of the most exciting things that I've done recently in preparing the data blueprint for publication at the conference here is to map out the daily triangle that Danelle Meadows talked about, and integrate the donut into the middle of it. So there's very much a cross-pollination here happening.
I can't wait to see that. That sounds great.
Great. Well, Kate Raworth, thank you so much for speaking with us, and we look forward to continuing to cross paths in the future.
My pleasure, thank you.
Great.